Good Sunday afternoon to everyone. I'm here at Victory Baptist Church, located in Ovalo, Texas. It is Sunday, July the 26th, 2020. It is currently 3:11 p.m. Central Time. I'm here behind the microphone, in front of the microphone, however you want it. Whatever the correct way to say it is, here I am speaking into this microphone. I always say it the exact same way because I don't know. Am I behind it? Am I in front of it? All I know is I'm speaking into it. And, well, this is one of those situations where I've hit the big red go live button and I don't really want to go live. I don't even want to record this. I don't even want to talk about this. But sometimes you have to do what is necessary, even if you don't want to, all right? And let me try to explain. All right. Obviously, right now, the world is dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, all right? No matter what your opinions are, okay, we're not going to get into that right now, but we're all dealing with it, okay? Maybe you're dealing with it because you believe the whole thing is a fraud and a hoax, or you're dealing with it because you believe it is real and you're struggling with it. But the fact is, everyone's dealing with it. You're dealing with it when it comes to your job. You're dealing with it when it comes to your children going back to school or not going back to school. And if you are a Christian, you're dealing with it and how COVID-19, the pandemic, and how government officials are handling the pandemic when it comes to church. Do we go to church? Do we not go to church? Do we keep the church open? Do we close the church for in-person worship and then we move everything to online? What do we do? What is the right way? What is the wrong way? And let me state this very clearly. While all of this is going on, the reality that we live in a time where people are very divided is becoming more and more evident. Now, clearly the culture is divided. There's no question about it. The world, the culture is arguing and they're fighting about everything. And one of the things I stated at the very beginning of this pandemic, and I know many people have not listened to everything I've said in regards to the pandemic. They've taken one broadcast or maybe one statement, they've ripped it out of context, and then they've emailed me and called me all kinds of names and stated all kinds of crazy things. But if you listen to everything I've said, I've been relatively consistent in what I have said over and over and over again. I have stated, listen, the world is divided. The world is fighting. The world is arguing. The last thing the church needs to do is, one, get caught up in that noise and start arguing and fighting with everyone else and arguing and fighting from a political standpoint or an ideological standpoint and arguing. The church needs to step back and go, we're going to be salt. We're going to be light. We're going to demonstrate love for one another. We're going to demonstrate a love for the world. We're going to demonstrate a love for our enemies. We're going to try to use this as an opportunity to focus on ourselves spiritually, that the church will come out of this situation better off spiritually speaking. And we're going to do everything we can to reach out to people with the truth of the scriptures. I implored the church to respond that way. I begged the church, don't get caught up in all of that. Step back and do those things I just listed. However, it didn't take very long that what you saw was the church was right there in the middle of the arguing and the fighting and arguing about this and arguing about politics and arguing about this. And I kept saying, don't do this. And you would see Christian ministries, instead of using this as an opportunity to really focus on people's spiritual health, for the church to really do some spiritual inventory, they got caught up in all the arguing and the fighting. And I said, don't do it. But, well, nobody listened. And that has what has happened. Now, there are churches who did not get caught up into all of that. I'm just speaking in general terms, all right? But I've been very consistent. Don't do that. And a second thing I warned was, do not get caught up into conspiratorial thinking. Once you get into conspiratorial thinking, it's over. I mean, look, the way conspiratorial thinking works, it's circular reasoning and there's no way out of it. You say this whole thing is a hoax, or you get caught up with whatever the conspiracy is, then you only look for information that reconfirms and agrees with your conspiracy, and any information that counters or disagrees with your conspiratorial thinking, well, magically it's a part of the conspiracy. So once you get into conspiratorial thinking, there's no way to get out. You're like a rat on a wheel just running in a circle. There's no way to pull you off the wheel because you're like, no, this is a conspiracy. Yes, but here's information that proves your conspiracy wrong. Oh, you can't trust that. That's that's part of the conspiracy. Okay, so the only information that I can look at is information that agrees with your conspiracy theory. Isn't that convenient? There's no way to be proven wrong. So I said, don't do that. So number one, I said, look, don't get caught up in the division. Let's focus on the spiritual health. Let's focus on what we can do spiritually. Let's make the best of this situation that we can come out of this better off spiritually. And number two, don't get caught up into conspiratorial thinking. I've stated that over and over and over and over again. Well, almost everything I've asked the church to do, the churches obviously didn't listen to me. I mean, obviously, I'm not some big podcaster with much influence, but I was out, maybe I was one lone voice crying out in the wilderness. Obviously, I'm not saying that in a literal way. Well, I don't know. I'm here in the middle of nowhere, Texas, so maybe I am. One small voice in the middle of nowhere, Texas, screaming out for churches to listen, and then you watch everything go absolutely the direction you didn't want it to go to. And that is frustrating. So I know that every time I speak, and this is just the reality of it, every time I speak in regards to COVID-19 and the church, that I am disagreeing and going against a large portion of the Christian narrative. There is a Christian narrative that has been developed since COVID-19, and I do this all the time. I tend to come at things and go, wait a minute. I know this is the way we're thinking, but let's step back and let's question this. Let's ask some tough questions. Let's make sure we're being consistent. Let's really think this through. But you can't do that because once there is an established Christian narrative that a lot of Christians buy into, if you throw anything out there to question it, they'll turn on you really, really, really quick. And they will shut you down. They will call you names. And it's just, at times, it's just ridiculous how that works. But there's got to be someone out there to sometime go, wait, I'm sorry, can I raise my hand here? Are we sure we're thinking about this correctly? Are we sure we're thinking about this from a biblical perspective, a spiritual perspective? You believe we're really looking at this from the perspective of godly wisdom? Are we relying on a wisdom that is earthly, that is sensual, that is devilish? Are we buying into a wisdom that is contrary to what we say we believe? Someone has to be able to raise that question. Now, I say all of that because this sets up what has happened to me. Because once again, I have found myself in a situation where I'm questioning, quote unquote, a Christian narrative that is out there. And as a result, I've ticked off a whole lot of people. Now, I guess fortunately, the Facebook situation has remained pretty small, and that's probably because we don't have much of an influence on not Facebook, YouTube. That's what I meant to say. Fortunately, the YouTube situation has not really blown up too bad because we don't have much of an influence on YouTube. We don't have a presence at all on Facebook. But on YouTube, we kind of have a presence, and our presence on YouTube is a weird one because basically I do podcasts. They're uploaded to the Spreaker podcast app, but they automatically send them over to YouTube. I don't have any control over the channel. I can't change the channel name. I really have very little control over what happens there. But one of the things I spoke about in regards to the church and COVID-19 did gather a little bit of attention. I mean, for the YouTube page, a lot of numbers. I think it's around 400, 500. Those are big numbers for a YouTube channel. But that's nowhere close. I mean, we're what? 40, 50, 60,000 elsewhere. I mean, you can't even compare the numbers. YouTube is almost insignificant compared to the 40, 50, 60,000 elsewhere. All right. So the numbers are I'm glad that YouTube is there. I'm obviously glad for anyone who listens. But so those reactions are small, and you don't really capture everything that has happened in regards to this situation. But I will be addressing some comments made on the YouTube channel since they're public, and I'm going to at least address them. I won't mention any names because I'm not here to attack individuals. I am here to try to point out, I think a lot of people missed the point. So let me explain what happened. John MacArthur of Grace Community Church released a statement basically saying that Grace Community Church was not going to follow the restrictions that was placed upon the churches in California, restricting, I guess, the size of the gathering, whether you could sing or not sing. And I don't know all the restrictions laid out, but basically John MacArthur was saying, look, we're not going to follow you. Christ is the head of the church, not Caesar. Christ is the head of the church, not the government. And he released a statement. Now, when that statement was released, I turned on this very microphone, sitting in this exact same chair in this exact same building. And I said, okay, I just got this email. I'm going to throw out some thoughts really quick. And then I'm going to go get something to eat because I'd already been broadcasting for a couple of hours. I was hungry. I was ready to go get food. But I wanted to at least address the issue in a preliminary way. And my thoughts, I thought, were pretty clear. I don't understand what was confusing about them. I think my position is well thought out. I think it's logical. I think it's rational. And I think it's biblical. But everyone thinks their view is biblical. But let me try to state kind of what happened. All right. So John MacArthur released the statement. I came on the air and I told everyone that I was posting the complete statement on the theologycentral.net pod page. You can go to theologycentral.net, go to the blog section, and there is the entire statement by John MacArthur and Grace Community Church, unedited. So I made it available. I wasn't trying to hide it. I wasn't trying to misrepresent it because I gave it to everyone. Also, in the episode, I read most of the statement. All right? But I have still been accused of not reading the statement. Literally, I've gotten emails. You didn't even bother to read the statement. I'm like, what are you talking about? I read most of the statement on the air and I made it available. What more do you want me to do? What you really want me to do is agree with it. And I questioned it. And that's anathema to, I guess, that Christian narrative that is being set up about how churches should deal with COVID-19. So I wasn't hiding it. I read it and I offered some pretty, very straightforward opinions and thoughts. Let me try to summarize as easily as I can. This is very simple and very straightforward. I completely agree with John MacArthur that Christ is the head of the church and not Caesar and not the government. I completely agree with that. That is biblical. No argument there. We are on the same page. In fact, me and John MacArthur are very much alike theologically. There's probably very few things we disagree with theologically, all right? So this is not that I disagree with John MacArthur's theology and therefore I'm using this as an opportunity to attack him. We would probably be far more in agreement theologically than a lot of people would be, all right? We are very similar. John MacArthur, in many ways, discipled me in my early Christian life, all right? He discipled me. Our church library has, I don't know if we have every John MacArthur commentary, but pretty close. So I've got nothing against John. People emailed me saying that I hate John MacArthur and that I'm attacking John MacArthur. And I'm like, what are you talking about? No. Now, I've disagreed at times with different things, but I think that's perfectly okay. All right. So I want to make it very clear. In my last broadcast, I read the statement, not every single word, but most of it. I definitely gave you the basic idea. And I definitely posted the entire statement so that you could read it for yourself. All right. So let's make that clear. I agree with John MacArthur, Pastor MacArthur, Dr. MacArthur. I agree that Christ is the head of the church and not the government. I completely agree. I also agree that I don't like the government telling us what to do. I completely agree with that. But here is the foundational point that I was making that so many people have missed. Christ is the head of the church, not the government. Fine. What should a church do? A church in which Christ is the head of, what should a church do that Christ is the head of in the midst of a pandemic? How should a church where Christ is the head respond during the time of a global pandemic? How should we respond? What are some basic biblical principles clearly handed down in Scripture? And we have some basic ones, right? I think we can all agree with these. Love one another. Love your enemy. That as a church, we should view all human life as being sacred because we are created in the image of God. People bear the image of God. It is marred by sin, definitely, but we are still created in the image of God. So life, there's a sanctity to human life. There's a sacredness to human life. So as Christians, we should do everything we can to preserve human life, to protect human life. We have a biblical mandate not to kill. That's pretty straightforward. I think we can agree with that. And so we have to at least take that into consideration. I think everyone can say amen. Also, yes, we do have scriptures that obviously speak of church, right? On the first day of the week, they were to take the offering. We see that in the church at Corinth. Okay, we do have it. Okay, that means, Sunday, that seems to imply a Sunday day of worship, taking the offering. Now, was that descriptive, simply describing what the church of Corinth was doing? Was that prescribing a certain way we should operate? Most say it's prescriptive and it prescribes what we are to do. Okay. We do know in Acts that in Acts chapter 2 that they met daily. They met daily in the temple. Now, does that mean the church should meet daily? Well, most people say no, that doesn't apply. We don't have to meet daily. Okay, so we have to do it weekly. Others will go to Hebrews, says, forsake not the assembly. Okay, well, that tells you not to forsake the assembly. That doesn't tell you you can never cancel the assembly or you have to somehow maybe stop assembling for a period of time due to an emergency or problems. But these are the basic scriptures people have cited to me. Okay, so here is the thing. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We have biblical scriptures about loving our neighbor, loving our enemy, obviously the way we view life, not to kill. We've got that. We've also got scriptures that obviously would demonstrate the church gathering for worship. No question about it. All right. It's not completely detailed and lays down exactly, how you should do this, how long you should meet. It doesn't lay down every single detail, and to pretend that it does, I think is a little disingenuous. So how do we work this out? Now, let me make it very clear. My point is, forget the government. What should a church do if Christ is the head? And I think that this raises some very important questions of how we should conduct ourselves. Forget what the government says. If we're in the middle of a pandemic and we're in the middle of a bad situation, and if the people in the church come together and they spread it either to one another or they contract it in the church and they take it outside the church and then give it to other people, is that a good thing, bad thing? What should we do? And I think that's a good question. All right, so that's the basic foundation of my entire argument. If Christ is the head of the church, which I agree with John MacArthur that he is, okay, then what should we do in the middle of a pandemic? Not what's the government tells us to do. What should the church choose to do? All right. Then I went from that being the foundation, and then I asked a question. I raised the issue of consistency. The issue of consistency. And my issues were pretty straightforward. Right here in Texas, a hurricane hit. And some of those areas where the hurricane hit, there were mandatory, evacuation notices. Hey, you've got to get out of here. Okay, you've got to evacuate. Well, in the middle of a hurricane where there's a mandatory evacuation, there's the government telling you what to do. Should the church go, hey, it's Sunday, there's a hurricane, it doesn't matter, we're going to meet? I've rarely seen churches make an argument that during a hurricane, they're going to meet. They're usually more than willing to cancel services in order to, even if they're not worried about the mandatory evacuation notices, they're trying to protect life. They don't want someone to come to church in the middle of a hurricane and die. If it's severe flooding, they will cancel church services. And many times in severe flooding, they will evacuate people and tell you've got to get out. Mandatory evacuation. Sometimes during a blizzard, churches will not meet because they don't want to put people's lives at risk. Sometimes if you're in an area where there's a severe wildfire, guess what you do? You don't meet because you don't want the people in the church to burn up. Why? In many cases, because of mandatory evacuation orders. Now, whether there's a mandatory evacuation order or not, the church never looks at it, well, we're not going to do what the government tells us. We're like, you know what? We don't want anyone to die. So you take the precautions and you do what's necessary to stop services. Now, I know there's a massive difference. Hurricane, fire, flood is a temporary thing, and then it's soon gone and you resume to normal. So therefore, the interruption in your worship service may be just one service, maybe just for 1 week, maybe for 2 weeks at the most, relatively a short period of time. I understand the difference, but the basic argument is simple. You're willing to cancel services, even go along with mandatory evacuation notices issued by government agencies in order to protect people during certain situations. How come people cannot logically see, well, could that not apply during a pandemic? I think that's a reasonable and rational question to raise. I don't see why that's so controversial. When I raise it, people get mad at me. That's just stupid. That's ridiculous. Okay, all right. So I've said Christ is the head. Because Christ is the head, how should we operate? Okay, we've got these passages that talk about meeting, but we've got these other passages that talk about love for your neighbor, love for your enemy, not hurt, that human life has dignity and value and there's sacredness to it. We don't want to kill anyone. Okay, we've got to have a balance there. It's not either or, it's a balance. I don't see how that's like, you would have thought that I was calling for the sacrifice of babies at midnight. I never called for anything crazy. I just raised questions. And then I raised the consistency question. And so I don't know how many times people sent me scriptures, sent me this, in Hebrews chapter 10. Hey, forsake not the assembly, forsake not the assembly, forsake not the assembly. I got that email like 50 times. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. So you're telling me your church never cancels services for any reason? I've seen churches cancel services when they go from a winter schedule to a summer schedule. I've seen them cancel a service. Cancel like an entire, maybe they'll completely drop the evening service or completely drop a Wednesday night service. Wait a minute. Are you not forsaking the assembly? Wait, what are you? I've seen churches cancel services for hurricanes, for thunderstorms, for winter storms, for flooding, for wildfires. Happens all the time. Wait, are you not forsaking the assembly? What are you doing? Clearly, forsake the assembly is the idea that when we assemble, don't forsake it. Right? I think that's a pretty clear, easy way to understand that. Now, do I want the government to tell me when I can meet and not meet? Absolutely, I do not want to. I don't want to see that. I completely agree with everyone else. That does make me nervous. I can understand being nervous. And I think we have to watch it. But again, the church should be making decisions irregardless of what the government, in other words, I'm not worried. My first thought is not what is the government going to tell me to do. The first thought is, as a church, as a pastor, what do I need to do in order to keep my people safe, to protect them? What do I need to do to ensure that we're not at all responsible for hurting anyone around us? The Bible makes it very clear that sometimes I give up my liberty and my rights for the good of other people. That is a very central biblical teaching, and the idea that I put others before myself. I've got to bring all of this together. It's a very layered thinking, and that doesn't even involve the government. So I raised all of these issues, and nothing but chaos has ensued. And I'm just baffled by what I said that's so controversial. I have been told that I'm a Democrat, that I'm a leftist, that I'm a globalist, that I'm a progressive. I don't even know where they get any of that. All because I'm just offering a balanced approach to this. I have been told that I'm going to support the New World Order, that I'm in league with Antichrist. I mean, just absolutely insane comments. So I just want to stress that I'm just trying to offer a reasoned, rational approach. So let's look at some of the things that I have been told. We'll just focus on YouTube, all right? We won't go through everything else I've been told and everywhere else people have, called me names, okay? Because it's pretty crazy. Let's just go to YouTube, all right? Here was comment number 1. Please take the time to read the whole statement from John MacArthur rather than posting a knee-jerk reaction based only on a headline you read in your friend's email. As with grocery shopping, it's not a good idea to blog hastily while hungry. I read the whole statement. I posted the whole statement. I read most of the statement. So here's an idea. It's probably not a good idea to comment hastily when you don't listen to what was actually said. Come on, man. That's ridiculous. All right. So another person, they stated this. Even with hurricanes. Hang on. Let me make sure I get all of this. All right. Even with hurricanes, etc., ye basically have a choice. I think what they meant to say, even with hurricanes, you basically have a choice. Now, wait a minute. That's not always true. In some hurricane areas, there's mandatory evacuation orders. So maybe you have a choice, maybe you don't have a choice. We'd have to test what happens during a mandatory evacuation order, and if you violate the evacuation order. I can't even imagine what city officials would say, hey, we've got a Category 4 hurricane coming, and it's going to wipe half the city off the face of the earth, but hey, there's a church, and they've got 1,000 people who are meeting. I think maybe the government would come in and go, no, you can't. But guess what? Most churches wouldn't do that in the middle of a hurricane because they would see it as a real, tangible threat. Keep that in mind because that's key to what I'm about to say in a minute. They would see it as when they see a real or perceived threat, churches take action. All right? We get a mass shooting. What do churches do? They hire security guards and they want people carrying guns. Well, why? Why do they need that? Oh, because they see a real, tangible, perceived threat. So then they take action. All right. So, but see, it's easy to take the action of canceling services for one Sunday because of a hurricane. It's easy to do that because that's not going to hurt your bottom line. You're not going to lose. You're going to lose just the offerings for that Sunday, but you're going to get them back. You're not worried about it. You're not worried about losing people. Everything's fine. But if it's a prolonged period of time, now we're going to lose money. Now we could lose members. Now all of a sudden there are other motivations involved because churches will cancel all the time during hurricanes. It's still a valid comparison, especially this Sunday, because in Texas we have a hurricane. Right? You can listen to the news reports about it. Not where I am. We're far from it, but you get the idea. And right here at this church, the building I'm sitting in, the roof got ripped off by a tornado. Nobody was in it. But guess what? If we would have had a tornado warning and I thought, we have some tornadoes in the area, I'll cancel church. Call me crazy, okay? He says you can evacuate or risk getting caught up. Well, you can evacuate unless it's a mandatory evacuation order. Maybe you can violate that, but the issue is churches don't. With this pandemic, the government is not giving you a choice. They are making edicts. Now, I do agree that I don't like when the government says, hey, you can't do this as a church. I agree. That bothers me. I want to make sure we all understand. That's troublesome. That's worrisome. Now, I would be really bothered if, like here, when they started limiting gatherings of more than, I can't remember, I think it even got down to 20, may even got down to 10. The first time we had to shut down, they're like, no gatherings larger than this. But they were shutting down movie theaters. They were shutting down all kinds of gatherings, no concerts. They were shutting down all kinds of gatherings. So it wasn't like they were just targeting churches. There are cities where they've shut down mosques, obviously. They've shut down all religious services with gatherings. So it's not just targeting the church. But I agree. I am very much for the separation of church and state. I am a big proponent of that. I mean, I'm a Baptist. So that's kind of a part of our history is wanting to be autonomous and wanting to be left alone. And so I don't like the government to do that. But again, let me make sure you get my premise. Forget the government. If Christ is the head of the church, how should we conduct ourselves in the middle of a pandemic? Forget the government. Everyone keeps misunderstanding my point. I'm not looking to the government. I'm looking as a pastor, people, what do I do to protect them? What can we do? How, based off the technology we have, how can we still function? What can we still do? And because of technology, even a little bitty church in the middle of nowhere, guess what we do? We air Sunday school hour. We air the Sunday morning service. We air the Sunday night service. We air the Wednesday night service. And I do countless hours of live broadcasting every week. So guess what? Even though we can't meet in person, or that we've chosen not to meet in person, guess what? We can still teach, preach. I mean, we've done catechesis during a pandemic. We did it, we were doing catechesis, trying to give people a doctrinal, theological foundation. We've used the technology every way possible. So I want to make sure I don't care what the government edict is. What should the church choose to do? That's the main issue. All right. I agree with you that when the government starts telling you what to do, that's a little, hey, now you're maybe overstepping your boundaries a little bit there. And I can agree with that. But just what? Just because the government may overstep its boundaries doesn't mean that I then put people's lives at risk and make a foolish decision in order to make a point. There's a time to make a point, and there's a time to worry about life. There's a time to worry about the situation around us. And we'll talk more about that in a second. This person goes on to say, I see Pastor MacArthur's point. I see his point that Christ is the head of the church. He goes, I also see some of your statements as being legit points. Well, thank you very much. I do appreciate that. What it boils down to is choices. Absolutely. People have got to make hard choices. We all should be allowed then, and we should all be allowed then and take the consequences. Now, here's the thing. I agree in some ways. We should be allowed, but if you're allowed, the consequences may not impact your church. People may catch COVID-19 in your church. They take it outside of the church. They spread it to other people, and then other people die because they contracted COVID-19 from someone who caught it inside your church. That's the thing I could not live with my conscience. I can't live with that on my conscience. Hey, you came to my church, you got COVID-19, you went home, you gave it to someone at your house, and they died. That is where I have a little bit of a concern, and just make sure we understand that. I believe churches should remain open, and if a person decides to go, that be their choice. The other point, which you didn't mention, is that there is a 98% survival rate among the pandemic sick. Okay, now let's stop right here. I have seen the 98% number. I've also seen it down to 96% number. Let's make sure we stop right here and state a couple of things. Number one, this pandemic is not over. So let's let the pandemic finish, and then we'll see what the final fatality rate is. All right? People keep trying to grab percentages. Another thing let's take into consideration, and this doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out. In fact, let's just look at this. All right. In December of 2019, basically COVID-19 was nowhere. Here we are, July the 26th, 2020. As of right now today, 16,133,849 individuals have been infected. 16,133,000 from December 2019 to July 2020. That's absolutely insane to try to wrap your mind around. Globally, over 646,000 people have died. Over 646,000 people have died. Over 146,000 people have died in the United States alone. Over 146,000 people have died in the United States alone. Now, come on. Let's make sure we at least put this in perspective. Hey, well, it's a good 98%, survival rate. Slow down. Let's put it in context. How many people have died? Over 600,000 people have died. Over 600,000 people have died in about 6 months. Okay, that's an insane number of people dying. And it's not even slowing down. It continues to spread, and we still believe most believe a second wave is coming. So let's wait till you quote a survival rate number, let's wait until it's all over. Let's wait till it's done. Okay. Then when it's done, then you can go, see, it wasn't that big a deal. I mean, That's the way some Christians act. 646,000 people have died. I mean, come on. It's not that big a deal. Yeah, 646,000 people have died from COVID-19 on top of all the other things that kill people. But it's no big deal. But hey, about 3,000 people died September the 11th, 2001 in the United States of America, and the whole country stops and everyone falls apart. And it's like it's the end of the world and we need to go to war. Over 100,000 people have died in 6 months in the United States of America because of this virus. Let's not play it down. That's what I get so tired of. These are human beings created in the image of God who have died. Where is compassion? Where is brokenness over that? It's like, well, it's not that big a deal. It's really not that many people. Okay, yeah, 600,000 people have died. Hey, no big deal. Yeah, it's no big deal until it's someone in your family who dies. Then all of a sudden it becomes a big deal. All right? I'm just tired of that way of thinking. All right? He goes on, well, over 90% don't even get that ill. Yeah, here's the thing. Well over 90% of people don't get ill. They're asymptomatic, but they can spread it to other people. That's the problem. Okay, that's the problem. People who don't feel sick because they don't have any symptoms will come to your church. Then they spread it, and then other people get it. They may not feel sick, and they spread it. And then they spread it, it spreads. People do get sick. People do end up in a hospital. Then you tax the medical care system, or people die. It's like I think everyone needs to stop and go read a book on how a pandemic works. And it drives me crazy. 22 years I worked in the medical world. And the stuff you read, people say, you're just like, what are you talking about? That's the whole problem. Some people don't get sick, but they're asymptomatic and can spread it. He goes, well over 90% don't even get that ill. With hurricanes and the like, the odds are quite different. Now, wait a minute. The odds are quite different with a hurricane. Now, I live here in Texas, which is home to the deadliest hurricane in American history. All right. The great Galveston storm of 1900. I've seen photographs after photographs of the great Galveston storm because I've gone to Galveston multiple times to go on a cruise, and I've seen the photographs of it. The Galveston Great Storm, 1900, the deadliest storm in American history. The Galveston hurricane killed 8,000 to 12,000 people. So the deadliest hurricane killed 8,000 to 12,000 people. Well, guess what? We're over 140,000 deaths in the United States of America from COVID. So it's killed far more people than the deadliest hurricane. It's just sometimes I just don't even know what people are talking about. All right. He goes, with hurricanes and the like, the odds are quite different. And who says this pandemic is the only time the government pulls this? Now, here we go. Here comes the paranoia. Here comes the conspiratorial thinking. Hey, this is not the only time the government's going to pull this. You see, right now, they're going to use COVID to shut down your church. And then if you let them do it, then next month, they're going to find something else to shut your church down. Then they're going to wipe Christianity off the face of the earth. Well, you do know in 1918, churches were closed during that pandemic. It's not the only time churches have been closed during a pandemic. I hope you do realize that. So why didn't they take advantage of it in 1980? Oh, but now it's all being put in place. Look, when the government decides to shut us down, they're going to shut us down no matter what we have or haven't done. All right. He goes, to me, this is just a toe in the door of the impending government foot in the door of total control. It's happening in other countries and will happen here. This could be just the start. The start of the end. Again, make your choice and deal with the consequences, but no one should be forced into one or the other or that one. Now, I do agree that individual churches do have to make choices. I do agree. I do. And I will say this, if you're going to open, don't then act like you're somehow spiritually superior and that everyone else is bowing to Caesar and everyone else is surrendering to the government and everyone else doesn't believe Christ is the head of the church. I believe Christ is absolutely the head of this church, of Victory Baptist Church, and we currently are not meeting in person, and it has nothing to do with the Texas government. In fact, we have the ability to meet. It's the thought that I don't want anyone to be put at risk, and I don't want them to put anyone at risk. And we already have someone in the church who possibly may have COVID-19, but they haven't been here. Well, I'm glad if they've been here and given it to someone else, could have spread it to someone else, and then we could have been partially responsible. And the last thing I want is the news media sitting here in my parking lot, shoving a camera in my face going, hey, your church is responsible for the spread of COVID-19 in this area. And 2 people have gotten sick and died. What do you say? Well, no matter what I say there, I'm going to look like an absolute evil monster. Well, we've got to do what God says. And if people die, so be it. Like, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be in that situation. All right. So those were, now the one comment is just absolutely crazy. And I could go through all the email comments, but all the email comments have misrepresented my position. My position is Christ is the head. If Christ is the head, what should we do? But there is one thing here that is missing in this discussion. And I have to get this out of the way. All right. Now listen to me carefully. I stated it in my last broadcast. Let me state it again. I stated that if you have one person who's like, look, the COVID-19 situation is real. I'm going to trust the numbers. The numbers may not be 100% accurate because whenever you're trying to count numbers in a pandemic, there's always going to be corrections and there's going to be things that are added or taken away. That happens. It's a crazy situation of trying to keep track of everything. Worked in a medical world for 22 years. I understand that crazy things can happen during a mass casualty situation and you get numbers mixed up and so I understand that there's going to be some correction. I do agree and understand that. But if you're a person who basically believes this is a real threat, real people are getting really sick, people are going to the hospital, some hospitals are being maxed to capacity, which is dangerous for the overall health care of a community. This is a virus that's placing people on ventilators, may have some long-term health medical issues medical conditions that could last way beyond you getting better with COVID. And this is a virus that is killing a lot of people, and it's killed over 600,000 globally, over 140,000 in the United States of America. And all of this has happened in 6 months. If you're a person who believes that, your perspective is going to be radically different. But if you're a person who says, I don't believe the numbers, I believe it's all a hoax, it's all a fraud, well, then obviously you're going to open the doors. Now, if you're going to open the doors because you believe it's a fraud and a hoax, don't wrap that up in a robe of Christ is the head of the church, like you're all self-righteous and you're all so holy and you're all so obedient to the scriptures. No, you're opening the doors because you don't believe it's a threat. But if there was a real threat, you would close those doors. Hurricane, fire, hey, attention in the area. There is a mass shooting currently going on 2 blocks away from whatever church. I know church is in an hour, but people may want to, not go to church this Sunday. I think the pastor would close the church down, right? And wouldn't just say, no, we're going to open the doors. We don't care if there's a person with a gun walking around. No, you're going to close the doors. Why? Because when you see a real threat, you take actions to protect life. That's what we do. Right? So I think a lot of this has to do with how you perceive it. There is a large number of Christians who believe the whole thing is a hoax. They've bought into conspiratorial thinking and they don't believe any of it. So they're not taking any precautions and they don't care if their lack of precautions hurt or kills other people because they don't believe anyone is really dying. Now, how does MacArthur fit into that narrative? Now, remember, I said, if we both start with the agreeing point that and I stated this in my last broadcast, we have to start with do we agree that the virus is real? If we agree that the virus is real and people are really dying and this is a serious issue, then I think we're going to approach it probably in a way that is much more in agreement. But if you're starting from the perspective that I don't trust it and it's not real, you're not going to take the precautions. I think a lot of this comes down to that. Well, did MacArthur make any statement that indicates maybe questioning the validity of the situation? Well, let me go. Remember that statement that I supposedly didn't read? Yeah, that's on our website. Okay, our website, theologycentral.net. Here we go. Listen to what he says here. An additional point needs to be made in this context. Christ is always faithful and true. Human governments are not so trustworthy. Scripture says the whole world lies in the power of the evil one. That refers, of course, to Satan. And to call him the ruler of this world, meaning he wields power and influence through the world's political systems. Jesus said of him, he is a liar and the father of lies. History is full of painful reminders that government power is easily and frequently abused for evil purposes. Politicians may manipulate statistics, and the media can cover up or camouflage inconvenient truths. So a discerning church cannot passively or automatically comply if the government orders a shutdown of congregational meetings, even if the reason given is a concern for public health and safety. Let me translate. Hey, the government says we need to shut down because of public health and safety. Don't believe them. You can't believe them. You can't believe them. There is the conspiratorial thinking. That's the reason me and MacArthur aren't in agreement, because we're coming at it from a different perspective. I don't buy into the grand conspiracy that it's all a hoax and no one's dying. I don't believe in that nonsense. And guess what? When you're MacArthur, all you got to do is we can't believe the government. Okay, we can't believe the government because Satan's at work and Satan's in control of the government. We can't believe the government. So when can we believe the government? When can we? When can we? So if Trump comes out tomorrow and says, hey, COVID-19 is over, then you immediately go, oh, can't believe that. Close the church. Close the church. Now, when you believe the government, when you want to believe the government, and then you say the government is lying when you don't agree with the government. It's not a buffet. Hey, I believe the government because I agree with what the government is saying. I don't believe the government because I don't like what they're saying. And then you use scripture to justify that perspective. Now, governments can lie. I completely agree. But you got to have some kind of proof that they're lying. You got to have some kind of proof that they're lying. Is my doctor, is she a part of the grand conspiracy? Is the doctor's office in the hospital? Is the people I worked with in the medical world, are they all part of the grand conspiracy? Are they all in on it? Every hospital, every doctor? Every public health official, they're all in on it. They all got the memo. This is a conspiracy. Play the game. There's no one really dying. Just act like there are. The people who are crying that they lost a loved one, are they making it up? See, that's why we have a different opinion. He questions the validity of it, so why wouldn't he open? I believe in the validity of it, and I'm not going to close unless I can prove otherwise. If I can prove otherwise, then I will prove it. And if I can prove it, I'm not just going to release a statement. I would be standing in front of Fox, CNN with all of my evidence and proof, and I would turn on this microphone and say, I've got proof, it's all a lie. That doesn't sound like a pastor. It sounds like Alex Jones. See, that's where it all draws apart. So let's do this. Let's just end listening to this. Listen carefully to the following.
Now to the other major story tonight, the coronavirus pandemic and the surge in the South. Tonight, the virus has now taken more than 146,000 lives, and that troubling news from Florida, passing New York in the number of cases, 12,000 more cases just today. Texas with 5 straight days of more than 100 deaths. Its hospitals under stress. Cases are also now surging in Louisiana, and there is a new cluster in New Jersey. Here's ABC's Stephanie Ramos.
Tonight, the grim new milestone in the pandemic. Florida surpassing New York State, now with the second highest number of cases in the country, behind California. All 3 states reaching more than 400,000 total cases. Nearly 50 ICUs in Florida have no available beds. Zane Wampler, an 8-year-old boy in the Florida Keys, hospitalized for more than a week with multi-system inflammatory syndrome caused by COVID.
The secondary syndromes that stem from this are horrifying and terrifying as a parent. My husband and I have sat there, and I have not left the room for 8 days.
His mom, Leah, says he tested negative for COVID in the hospital and was sent home. But Zane still had a 105-degree fever. So she took him to the pediatrician, who immediately rushed him by ambulance to another hospital where he tested positive for antibodies. She says her parent intuition kicked in.
Thank God I didn't, because I don't know that we would be having this conversation right now.
Zane was on a ventilator for a day and is still battling the rare condition.
If I can help somebody else, another parent, not go through what we've been going through, it would be great. helpful.
In Texas, hospitals overflowing with COVID patients.
We don't have the resources to be helping them.
The situation so dire, patients are being transferred from El Paso hospitals to nursing home COVID units as these facilities deal with outbreaks of their own. 16 states breaking records for hospitalizations and 9 states reporting record deaths this week, including California. Health experts there joining more than 150 doctors and scientists nationwide, urging leaders to shut down the U.S. and start over.
The only treatment we have now is shelter in place.
New Orleans shutting down bars and banning takeout alcohol sales. And in New Jersey, a new cluster of cases, 24 lifeguards testing positive after attending 2 parties at the shore.
All right, Stephanie Ramos joins us now from New York City. And Stephanie, I want to go back to that 8-year-old boy, Zane. We just heard his mother there in tears, battling that dangerous post-COVID syndrome. The hospital says he's not their first patient.
He's not, Tom. At the hospital where Zane is now in Miami, they've had 5 cases of the syndrome. Zane's is the most severe. And like so many of these cases that we've covered before, Zane's fever took a turn for the worse quickly. His mother telling us tonight they're taking it hour by hour. Tom.
Stephanie Ramos for us tonight. Stephanie, thank you for that update. Now to the passing of Regis Philbin, the legendary talk show.
Now, I guess all of that's a hoax. I guess all of that's a fraud. And see, if you believe it's a fraud, then I can understand why you're going to argue to reopen. So the issue isn't Christ the head of the church. It isn't an issue of Christ the head of the church or the government the head of the church. It's an issue of you don't believe all the discussions and all the reports. I've got a report right here in front of me that just popped up on my iPad as that was playing. Almost 40 countries have reported a record single-day increase in coronavirus infections over the past week, around double the number that did so the previous week. All right, so this is showing a pickup in the pandemic in every region of the world. The pandemic is picking up in every region of the world. It's not going away. Now, if you believe the whole thing is a fraud, then you're going to open. But then just come out and say that. It's a fraud. We don't believe it. We're opening. And then when people start dying, then people can look at you and go, what happened to your fraud? This is not about Christ being the head of the church versus Caesar. This is about we're in the middle of a global pandemic, a virus is spreading, and people are dying. If you don't believe it, you're going to open your church and you don't care. Just like has happened in a number of locations where people are like, hey, we don't care what we're going to do. We're going to have a get-together. We're going to have a party. Next thing you know, people are infected. Hey, we're going to open the church. We don't believe it's a threat. Next thing you know, the pastor dies. Someone in the church dies. There's been pastors who said it was a hoax, then got the virus and then died. That has happened. Oh, but that's all a hoax too. It's all a hoax. The only people who know the truth are, people who sit at home and they don't have to go out there and try to gather information. They don't have to go out there and interview people. They don't have to go out there and look at statistics. They don't have to look at morgues. They don't have to do any of the hard work. You just sit at home on your couch saying, it's all a hoax. It's all a hoax. Well, here's the thing. As a pastor, you tell me it's a hoax, I'm responsible. And my responsibility is not to needlessly put people's lives at risk or to be responsible for hurting the lives of people outside of the church. That is a major factor. Now, I want to do everything I can to get people back in this building. I do. But I know one thing I can do. If I can't get people here, I can turn this microphone on and speak to them Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I can talk to them in the morning. I can talk to them in the afternoon. I can talk to them late at night. We can do devotional studies. We can do Bible studies. I started a Bible Institute podcast where I'm teaching through the whole Bible I can teach and not put anyone at risk. Yes. Do I want people here? Yes, I do. Do I want the government telling us what to do? Oh, I completely agree with you. I'm worried about that, and I don't like that. And when I see the encroachment on the government, on the church, I get really, really worried. And I don't like this. Let me make it clear. But the decision shouldn't be just to show up the government. The decision should be made with all the biblical information taken into account. All right. We have a biblical model that they met every single day. Clearly, most Protestant churches don't follow that. So clearly we threw that out. All right. So now we're going to say, well, we have to meet once a week. Okay. Do we have to meet on a Sunday? Okay. Well, then maybe you could work it out. Like if you do have to meet, are you going to have everyone wear a mask? Well, some act like you shouldn't even do that. Well, how about have everyone wear a mask? How about have multiple services, 3, 4, 5 services, and where you can separate everyone and then have about a 30-minute or 45 minutes time between the services where you can do a deep cleaning and a sanitizing of everything. Why don't you just take whatever precautions you can? Are you willing to do that? Some churches are not even willing to do that. I don't know. I just know this. I do agree, and this is what I will say. If you're going to open, then don't sit there and act like you're so spiritually superior to everyone else and that everyone else is bowing to Caesar. I don't think any pastor is trying to make a decision because they're bowing to Caesar. I think pastors are trying to make a decision thinking about a whole host of issues. And I doubt any pastor is sitting there going, woohoo, I want to cancel services for a month. No, I doubt any pastor is doing that. So both sides have to be allowed to make a decision for what's best for them. Here's what I would say. If you're going to hold services, you hold them. But if people get sick and if people die, you got to accept that responsibility. And if they don't get sick, great. Praise God. More power to you. All right. But I don't even really know if this is a church Caesar thing. I think this is a church. Christ is the head of the church, and those churches have to make decisions. And I think, and sadly, and I stated this last time, I think many churches are making decisions based off 3 motivations. You ready? Number 1, they believe it's a hoax. Number 2, they're worried about money and giving. And number 3, they're worried about losing church members. They're willing. Church members may go somewhere else. Church members may start listening to other churches, and they may lose members. If you're being motivated because of a conspiracy thinking, or you're being motivated because you're worried about giving, if you're worried about simply losing members, then you're not focused on life, pro-life. Remember that church always talks about pro-life, about preserving life, caring about life, loving people. You're worried about other factors. Now, if you're worried about obeying Christ, then the key is you've got to figure out how you're going to state that. Because if you're going to say, we can never, under any circumstances, cancel a church service, because if we do, we're disobeying Scripture, then I don't want to see you canceling services. How many churches cancel their services when Christmas falls on a Sunday? Protestant churches will lock up quicker than you've heard. Boom. It's Sunday morning. It's Christmas. Churches are locked everywhere. Well, why did you cancel church for Christmas? Churches will cancel for holidays. They will cancel for activities. They will cancel services for bad weather. They will cancel for all kinds of things. So either your view is you can never cancel, or your view is you can cancel. And if you can cancel, then why can't you cancel in-person services during a global pandemic? So either you can or you can't. If you tell me you can cancel because you don't want to be too legalistic, so you can cancel for some of these things, then you can't tell me a person can't cancel services for a pandemic. And you're not even worried about the government. You're just making the decision based off what the medical world is saying. All right. I hope I've addressed all the issues. Oh, there's so many other emails I want to read to you. There's so many others, but some of them are just name calling and crazy. But it just shows you how crazy this situation has got. So listen, church, listen, Christians. Let's not fight one another. Let's not be divided. All right. But let's try to be consistent in all of this. Let's try to think about this logically. Let's try to think about this biblically. And let's do everything we can to act like the church, no matter what we're doing and how we're meeting. All right. I'll stop right there. You feel free to send me your mean emails, where you can call me some more names, to newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. I'll stop right there. Thanks for listening to this special live broadcast, reaction, responding to what people have said. Hopefully this will offer some clarification. God bless.